Okay, so good evening. My name is Brian O, Comprehensive Planning Manager for Permit Sonoma. I'm joined today, I have the pleasure of joining you all today in this conversation. I know, there's years of discussion and around policy, around programs for local coastal plan. And we're so grateful for the time and the input that we have had to date. This marks the second of a series of workshops that are largely meant to be follow-up and to be very much focused on policy discussion on some of these specific subjects that have been identified through the public engagement process to date. I am joined tonight by Gary Helfrich, the project planner, which many of you know, and some of you may also know Nina Bellucci. She's a project planner, also our housing lead on the comprehensive planning section for Permit Sonoma. And we're really looking forward to dive a little bit deeper onto the policies in the current public draft. We're again looking forward to the discussion, the comments, and we also want to provide a little bit more of a background that had really helped inform crafting some of the policies that you see in that public draft that's been circulating for a while. We also envision taking that information into the final draft. So, your input tonight is critical. That's not to say this is the final touch point that we'll have specific to housing policy for the local coastal plan update. We are always open and accessible over email, and looking forward to crafting some robust housing policy with you all for adoption to the board. That's sort of the next big step. So I will turn this over to Gary to walk us through a presentation focus for tonight, and looking forward to connecting with you all later in this presentation. Gary?
Okay, thank you, Brian. See, we've already covered the first part of this evening's agenda. Brian has introduced the team and given an overview of our topic workshop series. Tonight, first thing we're going to do is do a review of the LCP update, where we are, where we're going, and what the opportunities are for input as the policy moves forward towards certification by the Coastal Commission. Then we'll go over the local coastal plan housing policies as it pertains to affordable housing. And in affordable housing, we're also including workforce housing and farm worker housing. Then the final topic is affordable housing and Coastal Act consistency. I'll go into that very soon, but there is a fundamental challenge in developing housing on the coast and having that housing development be consistent with the provisions of the Coastal Act. So the ground rules for tonight is, please stay muted, and also remember to unmute yourself when you're recognized and use the chat and the raise your hand functions. Be respectful of each other. We really appreciate your input and want everybody to feel that this is a safe place to provide their input on the local coastal plan. We're not going to tolerate inappropriate conduct, and this will end at 7 o'clock. If you don't get a chance to say everything you wanted to say, or if you just felt uneasy speaking in public, please submit your comments in writing. It has the same weight as if you say something during the webinar tonight. And in fact, often written comments are better because we can give you a really comprehensive and well thought out response. And as Brian mentioned, we're recording the meeting tonight. It will be a public record. So the goal that we have is hopefully bring everyone up to date on what we've been doing with the LCP, create an understanding of why affordable housing is so much more difficult to develop in the coastal zone than it is inland. And this is not to say it's easy to develop inland. And also encourage input and recommendations. This is a big topic. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of challenges, and we can always use better ideas and better ways of making sure that everybody in the coast has a safe place to live. Right now, this is our project timeline. The LCP update began almost a decade ago. We are right now doing at this point, it'll probably be a 1.5 year long series of public review workshops, and we are reviewing the public review draft that was created out of the 2015 workshops and incorporated the input that we received at those workshops. The first public hearing is going to be the Planning Commission in spring of 2021, and the Planning Commission will make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors based on policy options that are provided to them and on public input. The Board of Supervisors will approve the local coastal plan. However, because the county doesn't have land use jurisdiction in the coastal zone like every other jurisdiction in the coast of California, the final approval is certification by the California Coastal Commission, and we anticipate that in fall of 2021. At that point, we're not done yet, because we'll move on to implementation, which is amending the coastal zoning code and writing a new administrative manual to help implement the goals, objectives, policies, and programs of the local coastal plan. There's been some confusion about this, so I just want to put a separate slide up. Everybody is looking at the same local coastal plan public review draft. We have not changed the public review draft since it was published in September of 2019. It is the same document. We will be, of course, developing policy options and updates when we release a draft for the Planning Commission, but this document's remained unchanged because we want everybody to be commenting on the same document and not have a lot of it'll create confusion. We want everybody to be looking at the same document, and we have not changed the document. This is part of the local coastal program, and local coastal program in the case of Sonoma County has 3 parts. It has the plan, which serves as the general plan for coastal development. Then the coastal zoning code will implement that plan, and the administrative manual will provide interpretive information that allows planners to process coastal development permits. That's not required to be a separate document, but we've gotten a lot of feedback that the coastal program is a better program with a standalone administrative manual. So we're likely to be considering that as part of the overall coastal program. With housing, this is our dilemma. The Coastal Act, of course, was written in the 1970s, and the demand for housing and the affordability of housing was very different in the mid-70s. And the point of the Coastal Act was to protect, and is to protect, coastal resources, and it is to protect agriculture, and it is to protect sensitive environmental resources. So the highest priority of use are those uses that carry out the provisions of the Coastal Act. Then in the mid-level, we've got uses that provide recreational opportunities, make it easier for people out of the area to visit the coast. But the very lowest priority of use is affordable, low-income, and moderate-income residential housing, industrial development, and commercial development. And this is the regulatory framework that we have to work within. The Coastal Commission recognizes that there's going to need to be a lot of work in interpreting the Coastal Act so that we can deal with the reality of housing in 2020. And they've provided a lot of guidance on how to move forward with affordable housing policies in the coastal zone. Right now, and this really speaks to how difficult it is to develop affordable housing in the coastal zone. We only have developed since the Coastal Act was passed 49 affordable housing units, and 59, and 45 of those are up at the Sea Ranch, and 14 are at Harborview. And a big part, besides the very strong protection of coastal resources, is that most of our coast is very rural, and it completely lacks the municipal services that are necessary to support the fairly dense housing that is also necessary for creating affordable housing. Um, and the sites that are available, most of the vacant sites just simply can't be developed at the density necessary to make an affordable housing project pencil out. And additionally, we're running out of land. There's only 2 vacant sites that have been identified as really being suitable for development of affordable housing, that have access to public water and sewer, that are near what transit exists along the coast, that are in relatively walkable, or in areas that could become walkable, and they're both in Bodega Bay. But we really have to look at other tools with only 2 vacant sites that have been identified for development, for future development as affordable housing. In addition to what I would say is traditional affordable housing, and that's housing for people with income levels, and Nina can tell you exactly what these levels are, but that are significantly below the median in Sonoma County. We also, though, need housing for the workforce, for the people that work in the restaurants, that operate our fishing boats, that build our houses, that clean our lawns. Excuse me. And farm worker housing is actually our best opportunity. That we always have had policies for providing farm worker housing in the local coastal plan, and we're now going to allow it in all agricultural land uses, and that's Objective CAR 5.1. And we've had a number of ranchers call us up during the LCP development, specifically asking if we're going to work at making it easier for them to develop farm worker housing. Those are much easier than workforce housing, just because you're in large tracts of land. The farm workers are necessary for the agriculture to operate, and we can make a finding that it's actually in support of agriculture to develop farm worker housing. Workforce housing generally has to be in urban service areas. In this case, we have a program to develop a workforce housing framework in the coast. And this ordinance would allow a lot more flexibility for adding housing in non-traditional zoning districts, in commercial, in visitor serving areas. And when it says resource dependent land uses, that shouldn't be misunderstood to mean environmentally sensitive areas. This would mean timberlands, or any area, or mineral resource sites. There's one of those on Highway 1, but any area where the workers are involved in resource extraction. So that would be the RRD zoning district. And the best tool, really the tool that has the most chance of working, is decreasing the barriers to homeowners and property owners developing accessory dwelling units. Now, accessory dwelling units are often called granny units, second dwelling units, and you're allowed to have one in addition to whatever zoning density allows you to have on your property. So if your property is allowed to have 1 home, you can have an ADU in addition to that. If it can have 2 homes, you can still have an ADU in addition to that. The state laws that have really encouraged development of accessory dwelling units very specifically say that they do not apply in the coastal zone. So once again, we've had to rely on guidance and interpretation from the Coastal Commission to come up with policy options that will make it easier for homeowners to build an accessory dwelling unit. The other type of accessory dwelling unit that really is the most promise of all is a junior accessory dwelling unit. This is when you convert a portion of an existing house and make a studio apartment that's no more than 500 square feet within the house. The Coastal Commission has determined that this is not that converting the interior of the house, as long as you're not increasing the footprint, is not development as defined by the Coastal Act, and would likely qualify for an exclusion order, so that people who wanted to do a conversion to a junior accessory dwelling unit could do it with just a simple permit and would not need a coastal permit. And some of this I've kind of got ahead of myself there. But I can't emphasize how much the Coastal Commission has been working with local jurisdictions to try and create a framework to develop ADUs. I think the Commission also sees ADUs as our best hope to increase housing stock without having severe impacts on coastal resources. And we're going to be following their guidance, and we're going to be developing policy options based on that guidance. It's not likely to be identical to our ADU ordinance inland. The ADUs may be smaller. There may be requirements of where they have to be on the parcel to avoid impacts to resources, but we still are going to be developing policy options to make it easier for ADUs to be developed. They are currently allowed in our coastal zoning ordinance, but it's an older ordinance that has a lot of restrictions that actually don't make sense given today's conditions, today's technologies for wastewater disposal. It is kind of rooted in the past. So these are the specific policies. And it's important that both ADUs and JDUs are prohibited from being used as transient rentals. JDUs, there's a fundamental reason that's tough to get around, which is the owner is required to be in residence in a JDU. So that's really off the table. And in the rest of the inland area, it's clear that ADUs, the reason that property owners get this density bonus is specifically to develop long-term rentals. That is the intent of the state law, and this policy carries out that intent. And then we have a policy in the update that allows us to continue to allow development of ADUs consistent with our existing zoning code. So our existing zoning code allows it, but it is the intention in our recommendation to update the coastal zoning code to more closely match the standards we have for ADUs in the inland area. And that's really, that kind of concludes my presentation on affordable housing and accessory dwelling units and junior dwelling units. I was wondering if Nina had anything to add, or should we open the floor to input and questions?
No, I don't. You did ask me, or you suggested that I might be able to define what affordable housing meant, and I can do that. And generally, it's affordable to people making no more than 60% of the median income for the area. So different funding sources, different programs may have different rules, but that's generally what it means.
Thank you. So Brian, do we have hands raised?
Yeah, we're starting to raise hands, but I guess before we just jump into that, I see that we have, just to frame the rest of the half hour we have together here. You know, this format, I know that there's been some communication with Permit Sonoma just on ways that sort of in this Zoom world, we can be better. You know, we're always looking to improve ways that we're communicating and connecting with people during this difficult time during shelter in place. We recognize that I think it was a little, in order for us to put on a workshop today, this was the format. I think we're always open to looking at what it could potentially look like. I welcome any suggestions, over email after this meeting, just so, we're always improving and trying to better engage with our communities. Do appreciate everyone's patience with this format. There's, obviously some limitations clearly with this format, but, we'll work on getting better connected. But with that, I will just open it up. And as I start to see hands raised, I will unmute.
Oh, Brian, before you go
Yeah.
to recognizing folks,
Sure.
I also put my contact information up here, and please feel free to pass this around. And if you have questions or want clarifications or even like to chat about the LCP update, please don't hesitate to contact me.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Okay, so please, everyone, just as you want to speak, let's just we have roughly 30 people in attendance today. I would say if you can, stick to about 2 minutes, and I'll try to avoid going back to people, so we're being equitable with that time. So it looks like Eric Frazier. Let me unmute you. Okay.
Hello, Eric Frazier here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Thank you. Yes, good evening. I was a little confused there about the 2-minute mark. It seemed like in prior sessions, we can also ask second questions and follow up and engage in discussion, that we wouldn't just be limited to 2 minutes. So I wasn't sure where you're going with that. Overall, I applaud the ability or the sentiment of wanting to have more robust outreach to stakeholders. And I think that's absolutely necessary, having just a couple dozen people get involved in very important coastal issues when there's literally thousands, if not tens of thousands of stakeholders is sort of inexcusable. And so I think it's really boils down to how you conduct your omni-channel outreach. So if you're just sort of relying on word of mouth or people that have approached you with interest over the LCP to be on a mailing list, I would say that's nowhere near being successful or adequate in your outreach efforts. Even the redistricting, for instance, has taught us that there is state standards for outreach. And I think that there should be a best practice and standard approach to your outreach. In the spirit of being clear and transparent, I would say that a definition or for a term like affordable housing needs to be more concrete. You guys should no longer get away with using this concept of affordable housing to be used in whatever situation you want to apply it, in whatever way, covering whatever topics. And that's just not fair when you're trying to make policy and understand the bouncing ball. We know that, for instance, within your policy that you're looking to restrict STR, short-term rentals, in order to somehow compensate for the lack of what you term as affordable housing / workforce housing, whatever. And I would say that's a big mistake. Not only is it improper and unfair, but it also, the motivation to do that, I think, needs to be exposed and can probably be exposed in the Coastal Commission jurisdiction. Let me also say, though, that when it comes to short-term rentals, you guys really need to pay attention. For instance, a lot of the times when we're talking about short-term rentals, we're talking about not conversion of existing affordable housing. I know that's sort of a term of art that some people like to use, and it's nonsense. Instead, what we're talking about are unused spaces, predominantly second homes, that are available on the platform to be used by people whether it's in a hosted situation or whether somebody's utilizing an entire housing unit. And these short-term occupancies are important for the economy, and they're important for the affordability of the owners and the maintenance of those structures. Furthermore, when it comes to ADUs, the ability to use ADUs for short-term lodging is a way to build those units, to get those units built, to have them pencil out. Otherwise, what you have is second home owners that don't list their property on the platforms because they're restricted in some way, and no ADUs being built because there isn't a financial incentive. So in other words, you're pretty much stuck where you are, actually in a worse situation when it comes to the concept of affordable lodging and the efficient use of built resources. So there's really a lot to learn, and you guys are sort of inside out and upside down on some of these issues. And so fortunately, there's enough time and we'll be able to muster enough strength. Let me also say that when it comes to that notification, one of those best practices are to notify property owners, especially property owners that you may be subjecting to restrictions. This is not being done, and it absolutely is the bare minimum of your outreach efforts, is to notify with ample time stakeholders that have a vested interest, those property owners and managers and tenants, that these meetings and workshops are going on so they can get involved and see how this impacts them. I know I took longer than 2 minutes there. Thank you for your patience. And I'm going to stick around and see if I have some more time with you.
Thank you, Eric. Definitely, I would say vacation rentals and housing, just sort of the interconnectedness there. More to come. We definitely have some more time, I think, recognizing that for a follow-up workshop specific to vacation rentals. Lots of really great points there about how we can increase accessibility and our outreach practices, and all good points. So really appreciate the comments there. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna lower hand and I will call on Doug. Doug, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm trying to unmute there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Thank you, Brian, and Gary and Nina. I appreciate the workshop meeting, and this is very helpful. We are in escrow to purchase a piece of property that is immediately east of In at the Tides in Bodega Bay. Gary mentioned there were 2 vacant properties in the Bodega Bay area. I'm assuming he's referring to this property as being one of them. I'm not sure, but there's a little conflict or dilemma, I guess, here. So the site has a general plan designation of urban residential. It is within the urban service area. The county's housing element speaks to a base number of units of 57 on this parcel with a potential for 136. So it certainly has a potential of helping you to reach some of your housing goals. But the coastal plan shows this as being in phase 2, I believe is what it's referred to. And it indicates that construction of a highway bypass would be necessary to develop the majority of this property. So, you've got, like I said, your general plan, your housing element talks about housing. It's in the urban service area, but the coastal plan, if we're interpreting this correctly, would limit your ability to provide housing on this property. And so I'd just like for you to take a look at that if you haven't already. I know our attorney addressed a letter back in November, and we haven't really received a response, but like I said, I'm just hoping you're looking at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, I mean, I think we would probably need to just do some follow-up, maybe with a specific planner on the project review side. But if you, feel free to, if you can just there's an email that's up on the screen. If you email your information, I'll make sure Gary sends that to me and I can route that appropriately. Any sort of additional comments specific to policies related to the plan?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
If you're speaking with me. Thank you, Brian.
Okay. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it. Okay, we have Kate.
I just wanted to follow up Gary's question. At the last one of these workshops, I don't remember who said it, but somebody said there isn't going to be a bypass. That plan has been ditched or whatever you want to call it. Is that true? What's the condition of the bypass?
The bypass is a Caltrans project. So of course, as a state agency, we don't control Caltrans' strategic plan or capital improvement plan. They've removed it from their planning. So Caltrans has no intention of building the bypass at this point and has requested that we take it out of the LCP. And if the State Department of Transportation isn't going to build it, it doesn't seem like it makes much sense to keep it in the plan.
Kate, was there any other specific policies you had questions about or?
Not at this
thing we
time,
should be
thank
looking
you.
at? Okay, thank you. Thanks for your comments. Okay. Okay, so I have, let's see, we have about 20 minutes. I mean, that's how long you have us here for. You can see Nina's working overtime outdoors. It is rapidly getting dark there. Let's see. Okay, we have a hand up. Let me get for C. Higgins. Talk. Okay. C, can you hear us?
Hello, good evening. Hello, good evening, everyone. I am just going to make the request again. Brian, it was so good to hear you talk about how we can make these meetings more inclusive, and since we can't all be in the room together. And I made this recommendation for the Friday workshop. Normally when we're doing county Zoom meetings, even in a webinar format, we have a question and answer feature, and we have a chat room where you can see who all the participants are or what their affiliation may be. And I'm not quite understanding why these workshops aren't including those features, which will actually enable better public participation and public engagement in these workshops. So I'm making that request again. And then as far as housing and some of the issues, the policies on housing, my concern, especially hearing about future plans for more housing and more development here on the coast, is availability of water. And so what I don't see is a connectivity between requiring, that there is evidence that there is enough water before a project can be approved. I know that we're experiencing this now with the Timber Cove Inn project proposal, and it concerns me when I hear about someone mentioning 130 more homes. We're just about to have 72 more come online, and the water studies that were done in Bodega Bay are from 2007. And so I'm just wondering, if you could address that issue. Does the potential for more housing have to be dependent upon, or should be dependent upon, water availability, and what kind of studies would be required before any further development could occur? Thank you.
I guess I'd give you a two-part answer. And oddly enough, I think the tools that we have in place in the rural areas are far more robust than the tools we have in place in the urban areas. That most of the coast, the vast majority of the rural land is a groundwater 4 zone. And so those would always require a hydrogeologic study before we allow additional development. And may also, well, probably, you know, I'm getting ahead of myself because we haven't made this recommendation yet, but probably will also require monitoring on top of the hydrogeologic study. With projects that are inside a water district, an issue there is that we have to rely on the water district's representation of their capacity. It gets a bit more complicated there, that if the water district says that they have the ability to serve, we don't yet have tools in our toolbox to do a third-party evaluation of whether or not that's a correct statement. It's a very good point, because that's where our depletion of water resources probably the greatest is in the urban service areas, and there isn't really any large source of water anywhere in the coast. So yes, we're concerned, and if you have ideas, we would love to hear them on policy options that could allow us to have more oversight on the utility providers.
And see, just to mention, just in response, I think there's varying levels of what the board, sort of different formats and some of those functionalities, but we're definitely looking into that. I mean, I think, you know, the questions about increasing accessibility, chat function, I know some folks are calling in. I think these are all things that we're mindful of and recognize, you know, they're real challenges in connecting with our community members. So we're definitely looking into that, and, you know, look for some of those changes to happen in upcoming workshops. So thank you. Okay, so I have CM that I will ask to unmute.
Hi, my name is Charles Metz. My mother-in-law has a short-term ADU, and it was actually originally built in the 1940s during the polio epidemic, where her father invited kids over to play. And then when one of her sons became a quadriplegic in the early 90s, it was a place for him to stay. And now it's a place where she earns income doing short-term. And I just kind of make that comment because if you allow ADUs to be used as the owner needs it at that time, if it was built for short-term, doesn't mean that it's always going to be short-term. I know right now she couldn't be able to rent her ADU out short-term because she has her disabled son coming up and visit, and she couldn't be able to ask someone to leave if it was long-term. And there's a lot of people on the coast who are elderly, who need extra income. And for them to do that, even be able to afford an ADU, it has to be rent out short-term. So I just hope that you will take that into consideration, that allowing it to be an ADU to be used for various types of uses will, for one thing, cause more people to build more if they have more options. So I hope you'll do that. I hope it just won't be available for long-term, but also short-term. And also on certain properties, if you can build structures, maybe 3 or 4 that are connected to the same septic system. If sewage is an issue, if you can do several units, but in smaller groups, or maybe in a town that's close by that would allow it. Maybe, could you look into that possibility? Thank you. Did you get that?
Yeah, thanks so much, Charles.
Okay,
I think it sort of echoes some of the points. I think our first comment was from Eric. I think all great points. Again, more opportunity for us to discuss, I mean, I know this is probably one of the most popular conversations around short-term and vacation rentals and use of ADU. So, those are all things that we're mindful of as we look at some policy options. I mean, ultimately, we are pulling together sort of our best suite and ultimately, making that recommendation for our decision makers to make at the end of the day. But your thoughts and the anecdote there, much appreciated. Thank you. I know Eric has been very patient here, but I'm also trying to give people an opportunity. So I'm going to go to Rue, and then if I can, I'll go back to Eric if time permitting, unless others may want to speak. So I'm going to click on Rue here. Rue, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I guess I'd like to reiterate what C said about access and frustration. And, I've said this multiple times, but I'll say it again. One of the big issues for people, well, there's the advance notice problem. But beyond that, a lot of people who live in Western Sonoma County, and in particular on the coast, the internet is not an optimal way for people to access these meetings, because their internet service is either non-existent or really intermittent, and sometimes phenomenally weather dependent. So this is just not a great way for folks who live on the coast or many other places to begin to participate as, in public participation in an update like this, which is so important because, as you've noted, it's going to last a long time. The last one is how many years in the making, plus all the years that it went function, that it continued to function. So, we worry about the impacts that will be lasting in any changes and amendments that are made. As to housing, I've just got, aside from preserving the natural area that's in the coastal zone and the Coastal Act requirement about preserving the unique character, something that happened on today that I was reading the ballot measure for Measure B, it specifically says the low density of housing stock in West County compared to other unincorporated areas magnifies the impact of short-term rental on the availability of housing. And if you think about the impacts of ADUs when they're used for short-term rentals or any of the other things that are used for short-term rentals, we basically created a problem that needs to be solved another way. And as you've noted, one of the big issues is affordability, because it was mentioned multiple times in the workshops, whenever that was, 2019, that workforce housing is really hard to come by on the coast because nobody can afford to live there, which flies in the face of climate change mitigations. So the housing issue is really important. We need to make it possible for people to live closer to where they work. And that's just not going to happen if we just have more ADUs and second dwellings or granny units or whatever it is we want to call them. So those are my comments, but I do think it's particularly interesting that the ballot measure actually cites part of the problem here. Thanks very much for doing this. I'm sorry it's a challenge. I know you're not making it hard on purpose. It's just, it just is hard. And I'm not sure that it's fair to a lot of the people who would like to be involved. Thanks.
Thanks, Rue. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think we're already sort of workshopping some ideas, making sure that we're getting the PowerPoint in advance. I mean, I think we've committed to like a 10-day noticing at least of the workshops themselves, but trying to give a little bit of ability for people that are able to or not able to join online, so they can download the PowerPoint and be able to participate over phone. I do see there's a few folks here over phone, so you know, I also, you know, if there's if anyone over phone, you know, would like to take this opportunity to provide some input. If not, you know, again, Gary's mentioned a few ways that we can connect as well, even at the conclusion of this meeting. So looks like there's a couple phone numbers there. If there's any interest, please just talk over each other and chime in at this point. Okay. Well, we have, it looks like Eric put his hand down, but would you like to, let me see. Looks like he, what is this now? Okay. Any sort of last comments? If not, I will go back to Eric. Looks like there's one here. Hi, it says there, Butaro.
Yes, that is myself, Brian. I have been involved in sort of the governmental affairs of local planning and issues for many years. And one of the things, although it's not predominant an issue on the coast as such, I know there's been elongated process in dealing with updating the on-site water treatment systems. If you could look at this so that some of those older properties outside Bodega Bay PUD or others, where they may not have current updated septic, and what that trigger point is so that housing can be preserved, whatever that nature of the owner has. It's really important because many times in giving owners information, there's absolutely nothing that exists in the file on permit history. And I have to go to other resources like something built in the 60s or so to find out what's there and what isn't. So just looking at consideration how to make the investigation, updating, or minor repairs to septic systems will help preserve housing.
It just a thing I would add there, that we're often challenged with the LCP because of intersecting jurisdictions of state agencies, and the Coastal Commission, their role is just evaluating the ground disturbance created by development, be it a septic system or a house foundation. And the Coastal Act is silent and does not empower the LCP to regulate or set standards for septic systems. And I'm not saying this is as an excuse. I'm just saying to kind of help everyone appreciate the complicated regulatory nature of septic systems. The regional board regulates septic systems everywhere. There's no boundary at the coast. And we did update our OTS manual, and there's a lot of acknowledgement of modern technologies in there that really help people develop tough, challenging, small sites. I mean, we've seen a lot of sites in the river that we thought were unbuildable that with the new systems, you can replace the old system with a modern, functioning, code compliant system. But I do understand the frustration in not being able to find the old records. not being able to, especially not being able to discover anything that was done pre-code, because there were no building permits in this county prior to 1963, which makes it amazingly challenging to determine what is actually there in the ground when it wasn't regulated at all. But I'd encourage you to take a look at the OWTS, the on-site wastewater treatment system manual, because it's really a change in how septic systems are regulated.
Gary, is that something we can just provide as follow-up with some of the meeting packets?
Yeah, well and septic has a direct link to it, so we can just link
pull
it
that.
to well and septic.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Thera. Was there any follow-up to that? Any was there a second part to your comment there? Okay, hearing none. All right, well, let's see. Looks like we're still sort of dropped off in attendance here. Any sort of final remarks from anybody from the audience here tonight? If not, I'm going to turn it over to Gary just to close us out. Looks like, sorry?
Bunch of hands.
Yeah, I mean, looks like the same people, but all right. Well, why don't we, if you're okay to take a couple, I'll do so.
Sure.
Okay. All right, Eric, can you hear us?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks again, Brian and Gary. I appreciate that. I did want to pick up and clear up sort of a misconception when it comes to STRs, or what you guys refer to as vacation rentals, and the offset to affordable housing. I think a lot of people are under the mistaken impression that there was ample housing available for the workforce in visitor serving areas already, and that for some reason vacation rentals took that potential off the marketplace. And quite frankly, the facts tell a completely different story. As I said before, typically what we see when there is property available on the STR platforms like Airbnb and VRBO are people's second homes or unused spaces that are being listed on those platforms, not spaces that are already accommodating long-term tenants. And as a participant explained earlier, typically it's people that want to have flexible use of their units. So hand in hand with a lot of the fallacies, a lot of them surrounding Measure B, which was just full of half-truth and lies, quite frankly, is a study that is cited quite frequently called The Impact of Vacation Rentals of Affordable and Workforce Housing in Sonoma County by a firm called EPS in 2015. When that was peer reviewed by academics, it was found to be incredibly misleading, exactly for that point about trying to use census data to understand if there are growing numbers of housing units that are being purchased for recreational uses. In other words, determined as vacant under the census data. And what we find is that number has held steady, if not decreased, over the past few years. So, and more to our point about being clear with that terminology over affordable housing and looking at the records of what you call vacation rental permits in the county, we see no instances where vacation rental permits were issued for properties that we determined to be considered affordable housing by the assessor's office. So in other words, housing units that got some sort of assistance for being built and so on and so forth. There's zero examples of that. And of course, reiterating our point that ADU build out actually helps subsidize when those ADUs are utilized for short-term rentals, helps subsidize that cost so more of them would be built. is an incredibly powerful investment in our existing infrastructure, ADUs as well as JADUs, because they concern already built housing. I know that the ADU is a separate structure from a house that may already be on that parcel, but typically the upgrade goes hand in hand with the structures on that parcel. And so it's important to realize that it is a higher priority in the coast as well as in vacation, or excuse me, in visitor serving areas, to pump more money into that existing housing stock so it can be upgraded. And if you share, if you know how to share, that means including short-term rentals in good policy, you'll see that there's actually more room for medium and long-term tenancy as a result. I know it may
Well,
sound, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thank you for reiterating that. Like I said, more opportunity to discuss vacation rentals. I do see the connection there that you're making with ADUs, but it looks like we have a couple more people, but thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a new, let's see, Norma Jellison. I'm gonna promote you. Norma, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you. I want to clear up a misconception and a mistaken impression as well. Often when people talk about affordable housing, they are not specifically and only speaking about affordable housing as defined earlier by the young woman who was on the call, that defines it with respect to a percentage of the county's populations, I'm sorry, income. What people mean often when they're talking about affordable housing is an inability to afford to rent housing by people who, many who grow up in Bodega Bay, Jenner, and other of the coastal communities, to stay in the community where they grew up and were raised and went to school and then get a job in a restaurant, in a hotel, in a shop, but they can't afford to rent an apartment or a house in Bodega Bay, Jenner, or other coastal communities because simply there is no, quote, affordable housing for them to rent so that they can live near where they work. So it isn't, affordable has a broader definition than affordable housing based on income levels.
Yeah.
Do you want me to try to give a brief? I know we're over time, but I can.
Nina, I'm not, I understand the definition of affordable housing. What I'm saying is that affordable housing out here on the coast in many of the communities is a function of those people who grew up here or who work in the restaurants and work in the hotels being unable to rent housing here to allow them to live and work in close proximity because the housing is simply not affordable to them. They may be making, they may be making more than, minimum wage, but that doesn't allow them to afford to rent a house so that they can live near where they work. I mean, there are people who work in the restaurants here who drive in from inland because they can't afford to live here.
So yeah, 60% of area median income is not going to cover the housing needs of the entire community, and there are lots of different ways that we can, through policy, or developers can through creativity, try to get costs down. They sometimes referred to as affordable by design or missing middle housing. And those, I don't know. I'm not as familiar with the LCP, so I don't know what policies might be able to encourage that or not, or if it's even possible. But as far as affordable housing is under state law is concerned, that's the definition. So I understand what you're saying, but it does have a legal definition in terms of our ability to enforce deed restrictions and to report that to the state.
Yes,
So
thank
I
you.
hope that helps a little.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think Norma, just if I may, just like the underlying theme I could sort of tease out there is when I see it in relation to what we can do with the local coastal plan update and the policies that are within the plan update, is what I'm hearing is to look at, sort of across the board, what ways we can, what sort of policies we can look at that is sort of addressing different levels, regardless of this sort of technical definition. So again, really great input for us to take a look at. I mean, we do have some policies in there, that's part of that public draft that's been out since, 2019. But again, this is what these workshops are intended to do, is to take this additional feedback and for our group here, the project team, to take a look, bring in our housing expert countywide, through Nina's support, and look to see if, there are some additional policies or some edits that we can do with that existing draft. So this is, again, all good feedback, and very much appreciate your time tonight, Norma. All right, so thanks everyone for bearing with us. We're a little over time here, but the drop-off hasn't come off too much, so I'm heartened to see that. I see there's a few people that I will follow up directly with, just to do some, if there's additional follow-up questions, ways that we can engage better, but also want to be respectful of everyone's time here. But I'll just turn it over to Gary just to send us off into the night here.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for participating, and we have heard you with regard to changing the format, and some of it boils down to a matter of finding two more of our coworkers that are willing to stay late, because we need a few extra folks to run the other format with breakout rooms. But there's lots of good input, and we really I hope that you'll just continue to stay in touch and provide us with input, not just what you didn't like, but if there's something you don't like, tell us how you think it should be fixed. That's really the best input that we can get, because often the reason the policy isn't that great is we may have run out of ideas. So we're always looking for new ones. And thank you.
Okay, that concludes our workshop tonight. We have Wednesday lined up for wildfire emergency services as the specific topic. Friday, ESHA mapping natural resources. So we're able on both of those get some additional support from our natural resources environmental section of the planning department. And then we'll follow it up with a workshop on pesticides and vacation rentals. More to come on that as far as scheduling, making sure we're increasing our availability and noticing that in an appropriate amount of time. So you'll hear from us shortly. Thanks again. Have a good night.